And welcome to this Fox 4 Kansas City Star KCPT live debate, digital debate. We're calling it across a number of platforms, including our Facebook pages and the fox4kc.com website. My name is John Holt with Fox 4 News. And as we welcome you to this first and likely only debate between the candidates for the 3rd Congressional District in Kansas. Before we meet the candidates, I want you to meet the esteemed panel I'll be working with today, beginning with Jason Hancock, who is a political reporter for the Kansas City Star, my colleague, Dominique Ricks of Fox 4 News, and Nick Haynes of KCPT Public Television, a host and political reporter for public TV in Kansas City. I want to make sure that you know what our format is today as we begin. We will be taking Facebook questions, or at least try to, so if you have a question, feel free to comment. If you're watching on the Kansas City Star or Fox 4 Facebook pages, feel free to leave your suggested question. We were going to have 60-second openings by each candidate. The order has been determined by a coin flip. Once we begin the questioning, each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer the question. Then each candidate will have a 30-second rebuttal. We will alternate the flow of those and the order of those. At the end, by order of coin flip, we will have closing arguments. So we begin now by introducing our candidates. First, the challenger, the Democrat, Sharice Davids, and the incumbent, Republican Congressman Kevin Yoder. By coin flip, Kevin Yoder will go first with our 60-second openings. Candidates, thank you for being here. Let's begin. Mr. Yoder.
Well, thank you for hosting this debate, and thank you everyone for watching at home. It's great that we have an opportunity to actually debate the issues in this race. My opponent has skipped every debate so far in this race, and I've done 3 of them actually by myself, and so this is an opportunity actually to hear the issues. Over 100,000 people have voted today, but we've waited till 7 days before the election to actually have a debate. I just met my opponent actually for the first time here today. And so we don't know a lot about my opponent. Let me tell you about myself. I'm a lifelong Kansan, and I've fought my entire adult life for this community, supporting good public schools, a strong economy, and a good quality of life for our community. My opponent moved here to run against me. Other than a brief stint in the community college here, she's not dedicated to our community. She's voted here twice in her lifetime before deciding to run against me. She doesn't have a job in this community, doesn't own a home in this community. I've been dedicated my entire life here. What we do know about my opponent is that she's one of the most liberal candidates to be nominated for Congress, as if she's running from California. She supports abolishing ICE and open borders. She supports abolishing all private health insurance and making us get on a European-style socialized healthcare system. And worst of all, she supports Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House.
Thank you, sir. Sharice Davids.
Thank you, and thank you to the Kansas City Star, KCPT, and Fox 4 for making sure that this debate happened today. My name is Sharice Davids, and I'm running for Congress because we need new leaders at the table. My brothers and I were raised by a single mom, an Army drill sergeant, and I graduated from Leavenworth High School. And I know that every opportunity I've had in my life stems from the fact that I had access to a quality public education. And I'm running for Congress because I know that we need a representative who is going to vote in our interests, not in the special interests. We need to make sure that we have a member of Congress who's going to stand up for Kansas values, not for Donald Trump's values. We also need to make sure that our voice is heard in Washington, D.C., and that's exactly why I'm running for Congress. My name is Sharice Davids. I do own a home in the district, and I'm asking for your vote today.
Thank you both. We will now begin our round of questioning. And again, 60 seconds for the first answer, 60 seconds for the follow-up answer, and then 2 30-second rebuttal segments. Because Congressman Yoder went first, we will begin with you, Sharice Davids, with the first question, and Jason Hancock will lead off our questioning.
Thanks for being here. We've seen a spate of political violent acts in recent weeks, from the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue to pipe bombs being sent to the media and to prominent Democrats. I wanted to ask you both, do you believe that the acrid tone and the tribal political environment surrounding the upcoming midterm elections has contributed to these recent acts of violence?
Well, first I want to start off by saying that my heart goes out to the families and the communities, particularly the Jewish community that is suffering right now because of the awful tragedy that happened in Pittsburgh. And second, I want to make sure that we know that in this election cycle, we have heard a lot of the inflammatory rhetoric that we really need to get away from. I have been solely focused in this race on making sure that everyone in this district understands what the current Representative what Congressman Yoder's voting record is, that he has voted 19 times to eliminate protections for people with pre-existing conditions, and that we know that we can get away from the partisan politics and the inflammatory rhetoric that Kevin Yoder has supported with this president. In fact, today the president tweeted out about how much he enjoys the support of Kevin Yoder.
Mr. Yoder, 60 seconds.
Well, I think the question is about how we can tone down the inflammatory rhetoric in this country, and I think both parties need to work harder on that, and our heart breaks for the victims of the tragedy on Saturday in Pittsburgh. And I'll tell you, we've had similar tragedies here in our community. Just a few years ago, we had a shooting at the Jewish Community Center. My friend Minnie Corcoran lost both her father and her son the same day. Last year, my friend Sunani Dumala lost her husband Srinivas Kuchibotla at the Austin's Bar and Grill in Olathe. So we know that hate crimes can affect all of us in our community, regardless of your religion, regardless of your race. And I've been a leader on this issue, trying to bring us together. I brought Sunani Dumala as my guest this State of the Union this year. She's not even an American citizen, to show the diversity and the pluralism of our community and how we respect everyone. I'm also leading on civility in Congress. My friend Emmanuel Cleaver and I work together to jointly lead the Congressional Civility Caucus, where we try to get Republicans and Democrats to work together to solve problems. I've got a great bipartisan record on these matters, unlike my opponent, who's so far out of the mainstream. She's no Dennis Moore. She's a liberal, and it's going to make it very difficult for her to work with others to get things done in Congress. I've got a record getting that done.
Time's up. Sharice, you get 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you. I do want to call attention to the fact that Kevin Yoder has on multiple occasions indicated that he will support this president no matter what crazy thing he says. And that's completely unacceptable in a time where the rhetoric and failure to act as leaders from our political decision makers has played so much into the public's dissatisfaction with the people that we've been sending to Congress. It adds to the broken system that we have right now in Congress.
Congressman, 30 seconds to respond. Final one on this.
Well, I think what adds to the brokenness of Congress is obstructionists like my opponent who would go to Washington, D.C. to oppose the president. You know, I never fought against President Obama. I never worked to oppose him. What I worked is for on behalf of my constituents. I never rooted against Obama. I don't root against President Trump. Who I root for is the American people. And my opponent's constant vitriolic rhetoric towards the president is what adds to the discourse, that adds to the lack of discourse in this country. Her attacks on the president, rather than trying to build bridges and work together, she's focused on rooting against the president and rooting against our country.
Our next question comes from Dominique Ricks, and Congressman Yoder will lead off on this one.
Let's talk about immigration. Big topic. Immigration reform has been a major topic over the last decade in Congress. Today, President Trump said he hopes to end birthright citizenship in the United States through an executive order, which we all know he cannot do that. So should Congress move to end birthright citizenship?
Well, I think Congress is going to have to take a look at all these immigration issues. What I'll tell you is the root cause of this problem is our failure to secure our borders. And my opponent, who's running on a platform of open borders and abolishing ICE, defunding our immigration enforcement, would leave our borders open. It's the magnet that drives the caravan into the United States. It's the magnet that leads to drug trafficking and human trafficking and sex trafficking. It's her open border policies that are driving us to even have that question about what to do with folks that are born here when their parents weren't citizens. What we need to do is secure our borders. And my opponent is so far liberal on this issue, she doesn't have a record of saying how she could actually be bipartisan. She keeps saying, I'll support a bipartisan bill for immigration reform. I guess I'd like to know, Sharice, what is it about Donald Trump's immigration policies that you actually support? What are his proposals that you could actually agree with in order to secure our borders and to have a bipartisan reform? It's one thing to say you're bipartisan. I've supported bipartisan initiatives. I've supported giving DACA students a pathway to citizenship. My opponent opposes border security at every end and won't support a policy of bipartisanship.
Ms. David, 60 seconds.
Thank you. For one, I don't support abolishing ICE. My opponent has continued to try to put out misinformation about my stances. I do support bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. When you ask about birthright citizenship and what this president said today about ending birthright citizenship, this makes me think that we continue to have unpredictable policies coming out of the White House that Kevin Yoder has voted with 92% of the time. And when we have a president that is trying to put out executive orders that violate our Constitution, it is that much more clear that Congress's job as a check on the executive branch is so important this day and age. We have to make sure that Congress is doing its job, and Representative Yoder has failed at that.
Congressman Yoder, 30-second rebuttal. Should birthright by Constitution?
Well, Sharice, you did say on a podcast this summer when asked if you would support abolishing ICE. I do, I would support. Well, you asked me about defunding, which I think is probably, essentially the same thing. Yeah. So when we called you out on it, you changed your position. You're running as a liberal, but you want people to think you're a bipartisan moderate, yet you won't give us one example of a Donald Trump initiative on immigration that you would support. What is the bipartisan proposal? You can't just give this platitude. Can you give us specifics? Also on that podcast this summer, you said that our immigration enforcement is rooted in violence and white supremacy. Do you still hold those views?
Final 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. Well, first I want to make sure that my position is clear. I don't support abolishing ICE. The fact that Congressman Yoder continues to push the same exact rhetoric over and over demonstrates just how weak his record is on this. We have to make sure that when we move toward bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform, that we have people who are willing to take leadership on this. And it means exploring all options and making sure that we're allocating our resources properly. Go ahead.
Let's move to the next question. Nick Haynes will provide that, and Sharice Davids will lead us off.
Thank you very much. Jason Hancock from The Star brought the beginning to this debate talking about the attack on a synagogue in Pittsburgh where 11 people die. What is the single most important action Congress can take to reduce such mass killings?
Well, certainly the single thing that Congress can do as a body is to really look at making sure that we're seeing an addressing of this public health crisis we have around gun safety. Certainly those of us, I was raised by a mom who was an Army drill sergeant and taught people how to use their firearms. I know what it means to be a responsible gun owner, and surely there are many people out there who are responsible gun owners who recognize that expanding our background checks and making sure that firearms aren't in the hands of people who are likely to do harm to others and likely to do harm to themselves is something that is common sense. And we also have to make sure that we're ending the ability of people to get their hands on bump stocks, which were clearly designed to skirt our ban on fully automatic weapons. And this is the thing that Congress has failed to do and that Kevin Yoder has failed to do.
60-second reply.
Well, I think most importantly is that we all need to lead in a way in which we speak to the value of diversity and pluralism and the different cultures in our country and how everyone's welcome. I led on those issues here when we had shootings in our district. I helped get better Homeland Safety grants for the Johnson County Jewish Community Center. I helped with Sunayana Damala and led a vigil here after that shooting. We need to bring our country together. And so the number one thing we can do is to get our country to love each other more, to work together more, and that starts with all of our leaders, Democrats and Republicans. When it comes to gun violence, specifically, better background checks, which Congress has passed in the last year with the Fix NICS bill, better mental health protections, which we passed in the last couple of years, a bump stock ban, which I've supported, and better school safety measures. One of the things we can do is help protect our schools and protect our institutions. I've done that. I've led on that, whether it's getting Homeland Safety grants for the Jewish Community Center or whether it's supporting school bond issues here, which would help get better school safety for our schools.
30-second rebuttal time. Ms. Davis?
Thank you. Well, one of the things I can definitely say is that part of the reason that Kevin Yoder has failed to act on this issue in a meaningful way is because he's the Kansan that takes the most money from the gun lobby and the NRA. Right now, we have a congressman who is completely beholden to the special interests and constantly votes in their interests. This is why I say that when I go to Congress as a representative from the 3rd District, I'm going to be fighting for our voice to be heard in Congress, not the special interest voice.
Let's move to health care. It's a major issue. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry. You do get a rebuttal. Thank
Well, I think it's fascinating that Sharice Davids stands here and tells us she's going to fight special interests when she's been a huge beneficiary of millions of dollars of outside PAC dollars through Emily's List, which takes corporate PAC dollars, Wall Street dollars. She's a huge beneficiary of special interest dollars. The vast majority, I think 90% of her individual donations come from people outside of our district. We know who Sharice Davids is going to be working for, and it's not the people of the 3rd District. She's lived here a couple of years her whole life. She's barely voted here. She's not working here. She's not engaged in our community. She's going to be working for Nancy Pelosi and the liberals that are funding her campaign.
Let's move to health care now. Appreciate that. We have talked a lot about pre-existing conditions, and both of you have made it very clear. You want to protect pre-existing conditions, but with the Affordable Care Act's mandate coming to a close and the act being chipped away at the edges, so to speak, the question becomes, how do you contain the costs for pre-existing conditions? Congressman Yoder, you will begin. How would your plan, your support, contain premiums for pre-existing conditions?
Well, better competition, more investment in innovation, bringing insurers back to the market. Obamacare's failed. 30 million people are still uninsured. We have one insurer in 1,500 counties, and Americans' premiums have doubled. So there's 2 options to go to from here. One is our proposal, which is better health care, more competition, more transparency in doctors' offices, giving people more access to the cost of their care, more health savings accounts, malpractice reform, bringing down the bureaucratic cost of health care. And my opponent's position. My opponent agreed to co-sponsor a bill called House Resolution 676, which would abolish all private and employer-based health insurance. It would force us onto a European-stylized healthcare system. It would end the Medicare guarantee, forcing seniors into that program as well, and it would triple our federal taxes, thereby getting rid of competition, rid of choice, and it would also eliminate private hospitals. And so my question for my opponent in this is, do you still support taking away everyone's private health insurance? Do you still support that bill? Do you still support getting rid of private hospitals, which would lead to the closure of Menorah and Overland Park Regional? Do you still hold those positions?
Thank you. 60-second reply.
Thank you. Well, I can definitely say that one of the things that I've been very concerned about is that when we talk about who is supporting these campaigns, certainly the money that Kevin Yoder has received from the insurance industry has led to the votes that he's made, which have made it more likely that insurance companies are going to be able to charge our seniors multiple times, up to 5 times more for their premiums. And also, he has voted in ways that would make it easier for prescription drug prices to be to continue to skyrocket. These are problems that so many people on the campaign trail are talking to me about. There are so many reasons that people are dissatisfied with Kevin Yoder as our representative, and attacks on protections for people with pre-existing conditions is one of those reasons.
30-second rebuttal.
Well, what you didn't hear in my opponent's answer is any solutions or any discussion about what she actually stands for on health care. And that's because her views, she's trying to hide from you, the voters. Look up House Resolution 676. Look at its effort that it would actually ban all private health insurance. 2/3 of my constituents receive their health care through their employer or through private pay. She would ban that. She would ban all of that insurance. And I'd ask, Sharice, do you think that's what the constituents of this district want? Do you think they want their health insurance banned? And do you think they want private hospitals to be outlawed as well?
30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. I know what the people of this district want, and it's to make sure that everyone has a right to affordable access to quality health care. And right now, there are too many people in our own community that are struggling to make premium payments, deductible payments to afford their prescription drug prices, which have been skyrocketing during the entire time that Kevin Yoder has been in office, and are concerned that he's going to continue to vote to take away the protections they have for pre-existing conditions. None of us want to go back to those days.
Let's move to our next question. Sharice Davids will lead us off. Jason.
So many people view the midterm elections as a referendum on the Trump presidency. So I'll ask you both specifically, which action by the Trump administration do you most support, and which action by the Trump administration do you most oppose?
I know there's been a lot of talk about this and whether or not Trump has been doing a good job or not doing a good job as our president. I know that there are a lot of policies of his that I do not agree with. I also recognize that when he comes up with a policy or puts out a policy that I agree with, that I need to make sure that I'm willing to work with him on that. I recently read about an effort to reduce prescription drug prices, which I was just talking about. I know that so many people are struggling with this in our own community and across the country. And if the president is looking for ways to bring down prescription drug prices, I think that that's something that we can come to the table on and discuss. In terms of what this president has done that I most disagree with, certainly trying to reduce access to affordable quality health care, pushing to eliminate protections for people with pre-existing conditions is really close to the top of the list there.
60-second reply.
Well, I think when the president is focused on growing this economy and creating jobs, lowering taxes, reducing regulations, keeping us safe, keeping our military strong, and reforming government, those are all things that not only the president is right on, but the majority of this district and the majority of this country supports. I don't like some of the tweets. I don't like some of the incivility, and frankly, I've stood up against that. And of course, in policies, I stood strongly against family separations. That was something that I spoke out on and was able to get stopped. So when I disagree with the president, I'm willing to stand up to him, and when I agree with him, I'm willing to support him. And that's the same position I took with President Obama. I worked with President Obama to pass 21st Century Cures Act and the Violence Against Women Act. These are bills that I've worked with both presidents. My opponent has run her entire campaign based upon the premise that she's going to Washington to oppose Donald Trump. And I'll tell you, her rooting against the president, rooting against this country, rooting against the success that we're having on the economy and the differences we're making for the citizens of this country. So my opponent needs to lay out specifically what she would agree with the president on. I've asked her multiple times. She said she's for bipartisan immigration reform. What is it about the president's immigration plans that you would agree with? How do you get to that bipartisan reform?
30-second rebuttal time. Ms. Davids.
Thank you. So a couple of things. One is the president's approach to most issues has been chaotic at times and unpredictable at times. This is no different whether we're talking about immigration reform or what we're going to do about the health care crisis that we're facing. There are too many people in this country that are one medical incident away from bankruptcy. It's unacceptable. And the fact that Kevin Yoder has not been a leader on this, it's exactly why I'm running for Congress.
Thank you. Final 30-second rebuttal. Congressman.
I think the question comes back to, does my opponent have any concrete plans on any of these issues? We've asked her about the health care bill that she's supporting. She won't lay out her health care plans at all. We've asked her about her immigration ideas. Will she lay out the supposed bipartisan immigration plan she has? In each of these cases, my opponent is not laying out the specific ideas she has where she would provide leadership. What my opponent is doing is running an election based on essentially the fact that she can oppose Donald Trump and that there's a wave that's going to elect her that's combined with millions of dollars of outstate money. Where are the specifics, Sharice? Where are the answers that you have to the questions as opposed to just attacking the president?
Our next question will come from Dominique, and Congressman Yoder will lead us off.
The U.S. Treasury reported today that the budget deficit will likely top $1 trillion this year. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid all make up about half of government spending. So here's the question. What would you do to rein in these costs? Would it be cut benefits, raise the eligibility age? What would you do?
I think the most important thing we can do, first and foremost, is to grow the economy. Bringing more revenue into this government allows us to pay our bills and pay our debts. In fact, with unemployment at historic lows, we have the lowest unemployment now in 49 years. That allows more people to work. That means they are less reliant on federal programs, saving us hundreds of millions of dollars. They are also paying more into the Treasury, bringing more money into the Treasury than we've ever had before in terms of tax revenue. They're also paying more into Social Security and Medicare. So frankly, the best way to fix this problem is to grow our way out of it, while combining with that, keeping a lid on spending. We've got to control spending in Washington, D.C. Both parties have been bad on this, but we need to control spending, keeping a lid on spending while growing the economy. That gets us to a point where we're actually balancing this budget over the course of 10 years. We can do this. My opponent, on the other hand, needs to show specific ideas of where she would lead on these issues. If she's going to oppose the tax cuts, she's going to raise our taxes. What does that do to the economy? What does that do to people becoming more reliant upon this government and the services that we have to provide?
Ms. David, 60 seconds to respond.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I can tell you that my plan won't include continuing to ensure that the very wealthiest in our country benefit from tax breaks. When we look at how the national debt has continued to balloon, certainly the 83% of the tax plan that benefited the wealthiest people in this country and the wealthiest corporations is not part of how we're going to increase revenues and bring revenues into our government, which is what Kevin Yoder has just said that he thinks needs to happen. I'm curious how, if Kevin Yoder is going to continue to support these massive tax breaks for Wall Street and the financial industry that have sent over $1 million to his campaign, how do you plan to bring more revenues into the government if you're going to continue to make sure that the wealthiest people in this country are not paying their fair share?
Congressman, 30 seconds.
Well, the average family in that tax bill got almost a $3,000 tax cut in our district. Sharice would take that away. And her health care plan that she refuses to stand behind, that she said she would support and co-sponsor, would double or triple our federal income taxes. What do you think that's going to do to the economy? If you like where your 401k has grown to, if you like the tax cuts that you've received, if you like the lowest unemployment rate in 49 years, and not only for 49 years, it's the lowest unemployment rate in American history for Latino Americans, for African Americans. Sharice's economic plan would destroy all of that by raising taxes and that economic recovery.
Thank you, Ms. Davids. 30 seconds rebuttal.
Thank you. One of the things that we didn't get to based on the question that you asked with the skyrocketing national debt that we have is that people like Mitch McConnell and other Republican leadership that Kevin Yoder votes with 97% of the time have blamed the Social Security and Medicare systems, which all of us have been paying into our entire working careers. You know, my mom spent 20 years in the Army, is almost 20 years at the post office, and has been paying into those systems her entire career. And the Republicans are trying to take those hard-earned dollars and put them toward these wealthy, the tax breaks for the very wealthiest.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Nick Haynes, and Ms. Davids will lead us off.
Thank you very much. In addition to us as 4 questioners here, we have people watching this debate live on Facebook and on the Fox 4 website. We're getting those questions in, including this one. What is the role of a free press in American government?
60 seconds.
Thank you. Well, I certainly think that the role of a free press in a democracy and a free society is very, very important. In fact, we have to make sure that when we see unsettling news reports of reporters being targeted or attacked, that we have to make sure that we have the leaders of our country, unlike Donald Trump, speaking out and making sure that our democracy depends on a free press. Our democracy also depends on every person's vote being counted, on every person's voice being heard. And until we get to a place where we have people who we are electing to send to both Congress and to the White House who are speaking out and making sure that the inflammatory rhetoric that's aimed at restricting our free press is curbed, I don't think we're gonna see much improvement here. This is unfortunately one of the reasons that I've been so disappointed in Kevin Yoder's lack of leadership. He supports this president through thick and thin. We heard about it today in a tweet, and he votes with him 92% of the time.
Congressman, 60 seconds to reply.
Well, the question is about how we can ensure that we have a free and open press in this country. It's certainly something that I've always supported. It's one of the reasons I'm glad we're doing this debate today. My opponent has been closed off from the press, not talking to the media, refusing to do debates. This is the 3rd time I've done a debate with John Holt moderating. I've done multiple debates in this election. My opponent has avoided every single debate, has avoided that scrutiny, has avoided talking to reporters and answering tough questions. She won't answer questions today, like what her specific plans are on immigration. She just gives platitudes like, I'll vote for bipartisan reforms. These are the very things that don't actually solve problems. And so she's trying to ride this wave, this supposed anti-Trump wave that she's trying to take advantage of. She moved here to run against me. She's not been engaged in our district. She's not been working here. She's not voted here. And yet she won't talk to reporters. And that's what makes it so difficult, because she won't be scrutinized on her record. We've had this 1 hour now to have these answers to these questions. Over 100,000 voters have already voted because Sharice refused to do the 6 other debates that I agreed to do and is not being transparent to the voters of this district.
30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. I too am glad that we have this opportunity to stand here with the Kansas City Star, Fox 4, and KCPT, making this as widely available as possible. When Kevin Yoder talks about debates that he's attended, many of them cost money to get into. He's refused to attend town halls that many of our constituents, community members have wanted to hear from Kevin Yoder for a long time, and we have not had the opportunity to. This is one of the reasons I've been so excited to be able to stand here and have a debate.
Congressman Yoder, the final rebuttal.
Yeah, we did multiple debates, Sharice. We've had debates in front of the Kansas City, Kansas Chamber of Commerce. We've had debates in front of the Johnson County Bar Association. You didn't attend those. Radio debates that were streamed online. You have every opportunity to talk to voters. You waited until a week before the election when 100,000 voters have already voted because You didn't want to get off your talking points. The Democratic National Committee that's running your campaign didn't want to let you out to talk to folks. And so now you're finally talking to reporters when a third or more of the voters have actually voted. So it's been a great disservice, and it's a specific insult when you just moved here to run against me. You haven't lived here almost for a decade and haven't been engaged in our community.
Our next question is about money in politics. This probably will be the most expensive congressional race in Kansas history, approaching, if not topping, $12 million before it's all said and done. Mr. Yoder has been criticized for special interest money. Ms. Davids has been criticized for a lot of her money coming from out of state. If elected, what would the two of you do to, I guess, maybe reduce the impact of money in politics? What can Congress do? What would you support? And Congressman Yoder, you'll start us off.
Well, I think the most important thing is that we focus on local donors being involved in local races. You know, this flood of outside money that's coming in to support my opponent's campaign, in which I think over 90% of her individual donors are from people that don't live in this district. I mean, it's quite a trifecta to move here to run against me, to not do debates, and then to receive all of your money from the coast to run your campaign. It shows a lack of dedication, lack of engagement in our community. And so I think donations need to be more focused on folks that are from your district. And that's where the majority of my individual donations come from. My opponent's taken donations from Nancy Pelosi, from Elizabeth Warren. She's had liberal extremists running her campaign from day one. She likes to go on and on about how she's going to obstruct Donald Trump's agenda, I suppose vote to impeach him, and to do everything she can to stop this country from moving forward. But what voters need to know, we need transparency. And that's really the most important thing here, is we need to know who these donors are that are spending money on her campaign. The super PAC, Emily's list, is majority, a lot of its money is coming in from corporations and Wall Street. She took that money gladly and even agreed that that was what helped her win the primary.
Thank you. 60 seconds reply.
Thank you. Well, certainly as someone who, I mentioned this before, you know, I started off as a first-generation college student at Johnson County Community College. I was raised by a single mom who served as enlisted in the Army. And I don't come from a family with a lot of money. I don't come from a family with a lot of resources. It's why I was so surprised when I got into the political sphere, just how much of an impact fundraising has on these campaigns, and how hard it can be for someone like myself who isn't already entrenched in this system to really get to this place where we can hold our current representative accountable, and where our voices as individuals can be heard in this political process. You know, I'm proud to have the endorsement of End Citizens United. There's only one person standing here who recognizes that this system is broken and has been working and putting out messages of how we can reform. There's too much money in politics, and we have to get away from considering corporations as individuals for purposes of free speech, because they're not the people.
Congressman, 30-second rebuttal.
I think the worst part of this whole conversation is Sharice Davids' hypocrisy on this issue. You know, she had a group that she's working with talking about getting money out of politics while having millions of dollars of outside super PAC support funded by groups that are getting their money from corporations and Wall Street to fund her campaign so that she can win. And then she steps up to this debate and says she doesn't support that type of money, even though she's benefiting from it. So the hypocrisy here, Sharice, is very difficult to stomach when most of your money, 90% of your donations are coming from out of state. And by the way, I too put myself through college and have student loans, and we all have personal struggle stories, but it doesn't give you a blank check to say that you're going to let other people from out of state run your campaign.
Final 30-second rebuttal. Ms. Davids?
Thank you. Well, first I want to start off by saying that although it is true that my campaign raised almost 3 times the amount that Kevin Yoder's did in the last filing period, that our average contribution size was $35. That's a lot of people. We have a lot of individuals, both in district and from across the country, because they know how exciting it is this time in history that we have to really change the direction of not only the rhetoric, but of the special interests who have been supporting candidates like Kevin Yoder for so many years.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Jason, and we will begin with Ms. Davids.
Ms. Davids, if you're elected, you would be the first openly LGBT person to represent Kansas in Congress. And Representative Yoder, when you first ran for Congress, you were endorsed by the state's largest LGBT rights organization. So my question to both of you is, should Congress change federal law to explicitly ban discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity?
60 seconds.
Thank you. Well, certainly I am proud to not only be running as potentially the first openly LGBT member of the Kansas Congressional delegation, but also that there are lots of aspects about my story and my background that I think are contribute to why I will make a good representative. Those things include being raised by a single mom. Those things include being a first-generation college student. So yes, that is a piece of who I am, and it really informs my view on a lot of things. I do think that what we've seen not only this past year from this current administration, backtracking on some of the protections for LGBT folks is very troubling. And I do think that LGBT people should be considered a protected class.
Congressman, 60 seconds.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't support any discrimination based on sexual orientation. I've stood up on this issue. In fact, when the president earlier last year said specifically that transgendered Americans could not serve in the armed services, I opposed him on that matter and stood up against him on that. You know, we've got to be a country of equality. We've got to be a country of diversity, and everyone's rights should matter in this country. And it shouldn't matter what your sexual orientation is, what your religious background is. All of us need to have our rights upheld in this country, and all of us need to know that that our government's going to protect those rights and ensure that all citizens are treated fairly and equally.
30-second rebuttal. Ms. Davis?
Thank you. I didn't hear Congressman Yoder indicate whether or not he would make sure that LGBT folks were protected for purposes of congressional legislation. I'd like to hear a little bit more on that, especially in light of the more recent issues that the president has put out around transgender, people of trans experience not being considered, that experience is being wholly disregarded. That has been concerning to me, and I think we need to stand up and make sure that.
Congressman Yoder, 30-second
I think
rebuttal.
I'm very specific on that. I think everyone needs to have their rights protected, and no one should be discriminated against based on their race, their religion, or their sexual orientation. And I would say, Sharice, while we're asking questions to be answered, I'd still like to know, do you continue to support House Resolution 676 that would abolish everyone's health care in this district? Is that something you're going to stand by at this point in the debate?
Our next question from Dominique, and Congressman Yoder will lead us off.
If elected and if your party retains, or Sharice in your case takes the majority, who will you support for Speaker?
Well, certainly we hope that's the case, and I would support any of the Republicans certainly running. Kevin McCarthy would certainly be a great choice, or Steve Scalise. Kevin McCarthy is the House Majority Leader. Steve Scalise, also a good friend of mine. Steve was the one you might remember who was shot at on the baseball diamond in 2017. They're both people that have worked hard for this country and have stood up for building this economy and creating good schools and building our military. I think both of them would be excellent candidates. Kevin McCarthy, Majority Leader, I think certainly someone who's the leading candidate. And I would say, in terms of what my opponent will do, she has yet to answer, will she vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House? You know, she tries to play coy on these issues. She won't say what her actual immigration ideas are. She won't say what her actual health care ideas are. She'll just attack President Trump or attack Republicans because she'll be a partisan leftist. Does that part, you know, Nancy Pelosi's funding her campaign. Nancy Pelosi donated to her campaign. And so, Sharice, will you answer once and for all, will you vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House?
60 seconds to answer the question.
Thank you. Look, Washington is broken. Congress has failed to act on so many things for so long. And I think the leadership of both parties needs to be held accountable. Nancy Pelosi and Paul Ryan have contributed to the dysfunction that we're seeing in Congress right now. And, you know, I think it's interesting that Congressman Yoder has already picked out who he wants to vote for without necessarily, I mean, maybe he already knows what their plans are to do things differently in Congress. But I can tell you, I'm not going to vote for anybody for leader in the hypotheticals that you're putting out here. I'm not going to vote for anybody who doesn't demonstrate a clear plan for how we're going to do business differently. I'm running for Congress because we need new leaders at the table. We have seen such dysfunction in Congress that we need to have clear plans laid out from our leadership.
30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, so what we heard right here is the classic Sharice Davids dodge. She won't answer a very specific question. We all know the first vote she's going to take is going to be for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. She doesn't want you to know that because she's afraid you won't vote for her because then you'll know that she's really a radical liberal. She said she's not a moderate. She said Nancy Pelosi is a tremendous leader. Sharice, I don't know why you just don't come out and say it, because what you're telling the voters is you're not going to be transparent with them about the very first vote you'll take. The question is, would you vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House?
Ms. David, you get the final say, 30 seconds on this question.
Thank you. So actually what I said is that I'm pragmatic. I actually think most Kansans are pretty pragmatic when they look at their decision making. Again, I'm not going to vote for anybody. I have not said that I'm going to vote for, I have not named anybody that I would vote for, because I want to hear from whoever it is that's running for Speaker what their plan is for how they're going to conduct business differently in Congress. Right now, we have a Congress, Kevin Yoder included, that has failed to act on so many issues. It's why I'm running for Congress. We need new leaders.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Ms. Davids from Nick Haynes of KCPT.
Thank you. What is the most serious threat currently facing the United States?
60 seconds, Ms. Davids.
I think because of the experience I've had on the campaign trail, talking to as many people as I can, right now I think the fact that we're having a healthcare crisis, the fact that we have so many people in our country who either don't have access to quality, affordable healthcare, are being priced out of their plans, can't meet the deductibles, can't afford their prescription drug prices. This is a crisis that is going to affect our country for generations. If we aren't taking care of the health and well-being of the people in our communities, then our country is going to really suffer. And people can't get to work if they can't afford their health care. People can't get to school if they can't afford their health care. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. You need to be able to have access to quality, affordable health care. And I think that taking care of the people in this country who are so close to bankruptcy because of these issues is a top priority.
Congressman, 60 seconds.
Well, I think there's a lot of issues you could go to here. Certainly, healthcare is a broad topic. Certainly, immigration. We've talked about both those issues today. I would say one of the most critical issues we haven't talked about that's facing our country is the opioid crisis. We now know drug overdoses are the leading cause of death for people under the age of 50 in this country. And a lot of these drugs are coming across our southwestern border. Drug cartels made $56 billion last year selling drugs to Americans. And that funds their criminal enterprise, and it destroys our communities. And so my opponent's open borders proposal, her proposal to let the caravan in, to let drug traffickers and human traffickers in, that brings a lot of drugs into our country. And so I would say healthcare in general, and the opioid crisis is one that's really affecting us, as we see the biggest cause of death for people under the age of 50 being that drug overdose. I will also say on healthcare, as we continue to debate this issue, I've laid out specific plans that we're focused on to bring down the cost of healthcare, to create greater competition, greater choice, to bring more insurers back to the market, to give patients greater access to health care. My opponent's, her attack on private health insurance would be the biggest threat to American health care.
Ms. David's 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. I'm actually glad that Kevin Yoder brought up the opioid crisis. I actually spoke to someone on the campaign trail, a woman who's raising her grandchild right now because she lost her own child to this crisis. It is certainly something that we could see a lot more action from Congress on. This president declared it an emergency, failed to ask for funding to address the emergency. Congress has done very little to address this emergency, and I would actually like to see more action from Congressman Yoder rather than lip service to this crisis.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
If Sharice would follow the legislation in Washington, we've passed dozens of bills dealing with the opioid crisis, focusing on drug treatment and access to Narcan, focused on all sorts of efforts to help people get the access to the treatments they need. Of course, stopping the drugs from flowing into our country is something we could do. Sharice opposes that, of course, because she wants open borders. We're researching less addictive alternatives to opioids at the NIH. We're doing a plethora of things to help local communities. And yes, we're sending more money, sending billions of more dollars to states to work on this problem.
Thank you. Our next question really is about the two of you specifically. And I think it's fair to say that voters in the 3rd Congressional District have quite a totally different types of candidates running this year. You have a 4-term incumbent and a political newcomer. So I have a variation of the question for both of you. I would start with Ms. Davids by asking, why should voters opt for someone who has had no experience with political office? And Congressman, you'll actually begin this segment. My question for you, Why should the 3rd Congressional District return you after 4 terms? What have you done to earn that?
Well, I think the voters here know that I've dedicated my adult life to serving this community. I've served in the state legislature where I focused on good public schools, growing our economy, and creating jobs. I believe this is the best place in America to live in all of the country, and I want to keep it strong. Wyandotte, Johnson, and Miami County. We have such diversity here, such opportunity, and I've fought hard for this community. I've reached out to the 4 corners. I've worked with people all across this spectrum. In Washington, D.C., I've worked to reach across the aisle, passing legislation in the House to increase medical research and have been a leader increasing medical research by 30%. I've increased support for email privacy rights and protecting us. I've led on the Appropriations Committee to secure our borders. I've led on so many issues that keep us safe, that help us produce better health care, that produce better schools. I've invested in these things, and we're growing the economy. When we have the best economy in 49 years, when we have an unemployment rate at 3.7%, these are successes that we need to keep supporting and need to keep focusing on. My opponent would go to Washington, D.C. She would obstruct that success and would lead to higher unemployment, higher taxes.
Ms. Davids, as best you can, I want to focus on the question for you, which is
Right.
why should voters trust someone who has no political experience?
Well, for one, I think right now, the American people, our community, like I said earlier, I'm running for Congress because I have been disappointed in our lack of representation in Congress. And, certainly starting off as a first-generation college student, being raised by a single mom, starting off at community college, these are not uncommon experiences. And I know that when I take this voice of the 3rd District of our community to Washington, D.C. to fight for access to affordable quality health care for everyone, when I'm fighting to protect people with pre-existing conditions and to bring down prescription drug prices, I'm going to take our voice to Congress. Kevin Yoder has had his opportunity to make things better and has instead voted 97% of the time with his party, 92% of the time with Donald Trump, and has taken so much money from the gun lobby, from payday lenders, and from other special interests that he is not representing our district.
30-second rebuttal, Congressman.
I think the other thing is that I'm committed to this community. I'm raising my little girls here. I want to build great schools for them and a great future. My opponent just showed up here last year as an opportunist to run for this seat. She's not committed to our community. She's never voted in a school bond issue. She's never voted for our public schools. She gives lip service on all these issues, whether it's healthcare or immigration. She has no specifics. There's no actual actions to meet the rhetoric. I've led on these issues. She hasn't. She's never once voted for our schools in a local school bond initiative. She's never taken leadership to actually make a difference for our community, and that should matter in this election.
Ms. Davids, final 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think what should matter in this election is that Kevin Yoder has not been representing our community's interests. He certainly has been representing the payday lending industry, which he took $320,000 from, the gun lobby and NRA, who he's gotten $95,000 from. The amount of time that Kevin Yoder has spent coddling up to the special interests and then voting in their favor has been completely unacceptable.
Our next question comes from Jason, and we will begin with Ms. Davids.
Thanks. What is the #1 most important action that Congress should take to improve the environment and to combat climate change?
60 seconds.
Thank you. One of the things that I've been concerned about actually around the environment and climate is that we have so many people right now who don't believe that climate change is a real thing. I do believe climate change is a real thing. I also believe in science. I think that Congress has really missed an opportunity to improve the legislation that dictates how the EPA is going to be run. It has allowed for this president to appoint someone who has really geared a lot of his policies toward dismantling the protections that the EPA has been tasked with putting in place, whether it's around clean water or clean air. We have a duty in this generation to make sure that the following generations after us are taken care of, and we need new legislation around clean water and clean air to do that.
Congressman, 60 seconds.
The best way to help improve our environment is to create innovation in renewable energy. Kansas is a big producer of wind energy, and I've supported the wind production tax credit. I've supported other renewable tax credits to get people to invest in renewable energy so that it can innovate and so it can be more affordable to consumers. Now, this is contrasted with what Nancy Pelosi and Sharice Davids and other liberals would do, which is they want a carbon tax. They want a national energy tax. Now, she may not say here whether she supports it or not, but the reality is that liberals in Congress have been pushing, and last time they were in the majority, they pushed for a carbon tax which increases the cost of energy. That's a new tax on the Board of Public Utilities. That's a new tax on Kansas City Power and Light. And that tax increases electric bills for my constituents. That means a family living at the poverty line, their electric bills go up. That's a big chunk of their monthly budget. And so what we have to do is reject liberal ideas on this. What liberal ideas will do is increase the cost of energy in this country, making it harder on working families. What we ought to be doing is focus on innovation, investing in renewable energy through tax credits and incentives that encourage the production of wind energy, solar, and other renewables.
Ms. Davids, 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. This is not either or question. When we talk about how our ecosystem, not only of innovation and startup, which I'm really excited about the startup community that we have here, the wind energy companies that we have here, and figuring out ways to support innovation is certainly something that I'm interested in doing. I want to make sure that as we move toward renewables, we are supporting that industry and that we're also taking care of the people who are working in that industry.
Congressman, final 30 seconds.
Well, it isn't necessarily an either-or question, but I would say that the leftist policies that my opponent has supported and her supporter, Nancy Pelosi, would increase energy costs for Americans, and that hurts poor Americans the most. And this is the dirty secret of their socialist liberal policies, is that it ends up hurting the poor people the most when they move in that direction. So the answer is better innovation. The answer is cleaning the environment through investment in renewable energy. What my opponent would do is support taxing traditional energy in a way that would increase our electric bills, make it harder on working families. That's got to be opposed, and that's why we can't let Nancy Pelosi and Sharice Davids take over Congress.
Let's move to our next question from Dominique, and Congressman Yoder will begin this question.
The federal government runs a lot of programs and a lot of services. Which one is so good that it deserves more money? And which one, in your opinion, is performing so poorly that it should be eliminated?
Okay, well, first of all, I would say that the NIH is a part of government that I'm very proud of. National Institutes of Health is the main researcher in America. And when I started working on this years ago, they were flat funded. And I worked to increase their funding. In fact, the last 3 years, we've increased funding for NIH from $30 billion to $39 billion, over a 30% increase. And this gives greater access to medical research and cures to diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and diabetes. We have over 10,000 known diseases in this world, and NIH is working to find cures and treatments, which brings down healthcare costs. If we could cure Alzheimer's, by the way, what a great way to bring down healthcare costs. I think one of the most destructive agencies out there is the EPA. And I think what the EPA has attempted to do in their efforts to attack Americans and drive up their cost of doing business hurts the economy and is what caused part of the slow recession. What we need to do is foster support for federal agencies that work. That'd be medical research.
Ms. Davids, 60 seconds.
I'm floored by the fact that you think the most destructive department is the EPA. That's so surprising to me. I was taken aback here. You know, when I think about which federal programs certainly we need to be improving or putting more resources into, I think a lot about you know, Medicaid and Medicare for people. These are programs, one, that are already being supported by our hardworking taxpayer dollars. We need to make sure that those programs are fully funded, fully supported, and that we stop the attacks that we're seeing from the Republican Party leadership on those programs. And then when I think about where we should be spending less money, certainly it's not in protecting our environment. But I do think that there's some regulatory inefficiencies that we need to be addressing. And the best way we can do that is, unfortunately, this president took a chaotic approach, but I think we were going on the right track evaluating our regulatory scheme.
Congressman, 30-second rebuttal.
Well, we know the answer to which agency Sharice hates the most, and that's immigration enforcement. That's Department of Homeland Security. And if you listen to the podcast this summer, she goes on and talks about what a destructive agency it is, how she wants to defund it, how she wants to eliminate it, and specifically even says it's rooted in violence and says it's based in white supremacy. And Sharice, I'd still ask, you know, you made those comments this summer. Do you stand by them when you said you wanted to defund the agency? And do you still stand by the idea that ICE and immigration enforcement is based in white supremacy?
Ms. Davids, the final rebuttal on this question.
Thank you. I was wondering how much of the time Kevin Yoder would try to spend bringing up the same tired argument. I don't support abolishing ICE. I've said it multiple times. I do want to address the idea that the EPA is destructive because too many of us know that issues of climate change are real and urgent. In fact, the UN put out a report not too long ago about the need for us to make sure we take action on this. I think that's something that is a dangerous policy of Kevin Yoder.
Thank you both. What do they say? Time flies when you're having fun. We're down to our
fun.
final question, and I'll turn that over to Nick Haynes from KCPT with Sharice Davids leading us off on this one.
Is there anything your opponent has done, personally or professionally, that in your judgment disqualifies him from serving in Congress?
60 seconds.
That's a good question. Well, I'm going to leave out the personally part because right now this discussion is not about who either of us is. Personally, it's about whether or not Kevin Yoder has done a good job of representing this district, and I don't believe he has. And for that reason, I don't think that he should continue to be our representative. The number one thing that I can point to, there have been many, but the number one thing that I would point to is the number of votes he took to eliminate protections for pre-existing conditions. And regardless of whether or not he says that he hasn't done that, we know that he has. It's been written about multiple times. And I also want to make sure that people know that saying that insurance companies can continue to cover but charge unlimited amounts is not the same thing as saying that everyone will have access to affordable quality health care.
Congressman, 60 seconds.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would say that my opponent's positions that are so far out of the mainstream of this district means that she's not a representative voice of this community. Her position on abolishing all private health insurance, to me, is a radical position. Her position on eliminating Medicare and forcing all seniors into this new socialized system is not a position this district wants. Her position on tripling our taxes, to me, is outside the mainstream of this district. She won't answer questions about that proposal because she knows that it would expose the fact that she is too radical for the district. Her position on calling immigration enforcement white supremacy, to me, is beyond the pale and beyond where this district wants her to be. And frankly, her position on supporting Nancy Pelosi, although she won't admit it today, to me is something this district doesn't want to see. They want to see leaders like myself who are reaching across the aisle to get things done. And I've given you specifics on each issue, and she has it. And I think that means that she is not someone that would be appropriate to represent this district. I don't believe that her work in this community, her lack of voting here twice over her entire life before she ran for Congress, to me, is not consistent with someone who's working for all of us.
Ms. Davids, 30 seconds.
Thank you. First of all, Kevin Yoder has continued to misrepresent my positions by trying to say things that I didn't say. I'm not even going to repeat some of the things that he just said that were so outrageous. I will just say that this district does not want someone who is taking Donald Trump's values and the special interests voice to Congress. We want someone who is representing our community's values. And right now, we don't have that in Kevin Yoder.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
I think the lack of the ability to answer simple questions on this. Do you still support House Resolution 676, which would abolish all health insurance and make all of us go into a European socialized system? Do you still support that or not? That is a simple yes or no question. So it's not about putting words in your mouth. You can put your own words there if you would say, no, I don't, or yes, I still do. The reality is she does, and she doesn't want to tell us. And in each one of these issues, she's trying to pull the wool over the voters' eyes, like saying that she can't tell us who she's going to be voting for Speaker. I think my opponent needs to be more transparent for the people of this district.
Time now for closing statements. 60 seconds each by pre-debate coin flip, one by Sharice Davids. She chose to go last. Kevin Yoder, you will lead off our closing statements.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you for putting on this debate. I'm glad we actually could debate here. It's been 3 months since we've been running against each other. I just met my opponent today for the very first time. She moved here earlier this year to run against me. She's probably moving out if she doesn't win the race. She's not someone who's been dedicated to our community, and she's talked about repeatedly what this community wants, but she hasn't been here. She hasn't lived here. I've worked hard for this district over the past 8 years in Congress, and I worked hard for it in the state legislature 8 years before that. I'm committed to this district. I've supported local funding for public schools. I've supported state and federal funding for public schools. I've been awarded nationally for my work on early childhood education and medical research. I'm reaching across the aisle, working with my colleague Emmanuel Cleaver to co-chair the Civility Caucus. I'm someone who's near the center of this district. My opponent, on the other hand, would be a far extremist, and she hasn't answered any specific questions today on a number of issues. Look up House Resolution 676. Ask her if she'd vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, and ask her to explain her remarks this summer claiming that our immigration enforcement is based in white supremacy. She's too radical and too out of touch for this district. I've been focused on fighting for all of you and getting the job done.
Kevin Yoder, thank you. Sharice Davids, the final 60 seconds.
Thank you. One, I appreciate the folks who took the time to watch the debate that we finally were able to have here. And thank you to the Star and KCPT and Fox 4. You know, we have an opportunity in these midterms. We have an opportunity to really take this time in history and make a change for the better, to progress our country forward. I have been so inspired by the number of people who have helped on this campaign, who have put in their time and energy, young folks, people who have never participated in this process before, because they know that they haven't been heard or seen. Well, I see you and I hear you. And I want to take our voice to Congress, not the voice of the special interests, not the values of Donald Trump, but our voice. And when I get to Congress, I'm going to fight for us. I'm asking you for your vote. My name is Sharice Davids. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us on this digital debate to discuss the issues. We appreciate you being here. I want to take this opportunity to thank this great panel that we had today and our partners, KCPT, Public Television, and the Kansas City Star, with a special thanks to Colleen Nelson, the Vice President and Editorial Page Editor, who worked doggedly to bring these two people together here so you could hear their views. Thank you for joining us. Feel free to share on your Facebook pages. This moment, this hour that we've had here will remain on our Facebook pages for you to look at again and to share. Thank you again, and of course, don't forget to vote.